So today we're going to work with abstract landscape painting. Right now we're out in San Benito County, and you need to go out and just check out your scene. I'm looking at just cloud formations, mountain ranges, agricultural lands, and as I examine my landscape, I'm breaking everything up into simple shapes. I'm just panning the area and thinking about different compositions. Uh, I'm looking at the agricultural land as one big mass shape. There was a nice green rectangle. You can look at cloud formations as large, simple shapes, or even trees. Here's a nice hillside with some California oaks. Take a look at your negative space of the sky, and the large round shape of your trees, your tree line, the massive shape of a hill. All this can be taken into consideration when you're coming up with your composition. So for this assignment, we're just doing a simple abstract landscape. And when I say abstract, we're breaking the scene into large shapes, a series of large, medium, and small shapes. Okay, so for my setup, I have just a simple chair, backpack with water, uh, sketchbook, sketching materials, watercolor pad, watercolors. The watercolor pad I'm using is the Arches 140-pound pad. It's 5.9 inches by 11.8 inches. That's a nice size for a still life. I have water for drinking, and I will put water into the simple glass jar that I have there. So this is pretty much all you need to set up for your landscape. I typically begin by starting a series of sketches. I did a couple sketches of the area. I'm only going to show, for the sake of this demo, one of the sketches that I created for this scene. And I just started by breaking up that landscape into very, very simple shapes. I dropped my horizon line down below uh, the center point. So when you put your horizon line in, you want it to be below or above the center point. Don't put it right at the center. Otherwise, it will break your image up it'll just break your composition in half. So it's better to look at 1/3 or 1/5 placement of the horizon line. Once I put the horizon line in and the mountain range, I quickly put in a couple simple shapes to indicate the clouds. And there were some uh, buildings, and there was a tree line. So I'm just putting very simple indications that would indicate the tree line and the agricultural buildings. They're probably storage facilities or a farmhouse way out in the middle of this huge ranch land. I believe this to be the Murphy Ranch out in San Benito County. So once I put in my large shapes and my small shapes, I just go in and create a value pattern. My smaller shapes are going to be darker in value, and the larger shapes will be mid-tone and dark tones. And you can see I dropped in a photo of my scene where my sky area will be the largest shape, which is of a very light value. So I'm breaking this scene up into just a couple, a value pattern, a pattern of um, linear shapes. So here I'm going in and putting in some refinement, but the goal is to just have a very, very simple uh, series of very simple shapes. The goal is not to have a highly detailed, realistic scene, but just with watercolor, we're just going to lay down some abstract shapes. Right now, I'm just working on a very linear shape. Uh, there was this really nice area of farmland that's green. So I put in a nice, highly saturated green. And it's just a small quantity. And now in the background, I'm just putting in a thicker line. The colors I'm using are sap green, yellow ochre, and raw umber. And later for the sky, I'll use a little bit of Payne's gray. But for the most part, I'm just breaking this composition up into very simple abstract shapes. Now for your larger areas, as you can see, I'm using a flat brush, and I will use that flat brush to put in the cloud formations in the background. That 1-inch flat brush is really, really good for uh, covering a large area. So I'm adding some water to the paints there to lighten those cloud formations. They were looking a little bit dark. And there were some shadows underneath the cloud, so I'm putting an additional value to create some tone in those cloud formations. And that's my sketch in the upper right hand corner. I'm referring to the very simple sketch. The reason I'm looking at the sketch and the scene is because I just want to create a very, very simple composition of abstract shapes. And in this particular landscape, everything is very linear. It's a combination of horizontal bands, the lower band of thick band of raw umber uh, is the farmland in the foreground has a very nice, deep, rich, dark uh, band of color, and that's a really nice contrast with that saturated sap green. So I'm adding a little bit of Payne's gray to the raw umber to make the color of the farmland a little bit deeper. There's some areas where the color is deep and dark, and then there are other areas where there's less saturation. And then there's a very nice series of organic rounded shapes which form the tree line behind a series of buildings that probably store some of the agricultural produce that comes from the land. It's also a location where some trucks can come in and out to load up whatever has been growing in the area. I'm just going into some of the building areas and touching up some of the building. Just a little spot of the yellow ochre, putting in a bright color there. As I pull together this painting, I'm really trying to keep it simple, and I'm looking at my combination of simple saturated shapes that might be small in combination with some larger shapes. I'm looking at value pattern. I'm looking at tonalism and variety. Now we'll go over various compositional strategies. This could be considered the Steelyard strategy, where you have a series of linear shapes with a variety within the scene.